Hi, hello, and welcome to Woodhull's Freedom Forum. This is a brand new project for Woodhull. We thought it was time for some no holds barred conversations, just one on one, me with some of the amazing people that I know and have worked with over the years, talking transparently and very directly about what's going on in the country today, and hopefully offering some solutions and some hope and some direction. And it's especially fitting from my perspective that today's person is Nadine Smith. So if you never heard of Nadine Smith, I, I don't know where you live, because Nadine is the co-founder and CEO of Equality Florida, which is Florida's largest organization dedicated to ending discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. In 2022, Nadine was named to the Time 100, which is Time's annual list of the 100 most influential people in the world. Nadine is a former award-winning journalist turned organizer, thank heavens for our movements, was one of 4 national co-chairs of the 1993 March on Washington. Nadine was part of the historic Oval Office meeting between then President Clinton, the first such meeting between a sitting president and gay community leaders. She's also a recipient of the Vicky Sexual Freedom Award for her work. And maybe most importantly to me, Nadine is my very good friend. Welcome, Nadine.
Thank you, Ricci.
You
No
are
holds barred.
no holds barred. We're just having a real conversation as if 43 million people weren't listening to us.
Okay. I'm ready to
And
rumble.
as if it wasn't
Let's
going to
do
be
it.
recorded in a time where everybody's worried about everything, right? So for the past several years, as the leader of Equality Florida, you've been at the epicenter of the attacks that everybody seems to have just discovered in the last 100 days. You've led the most amazing resistance at the state level. I know last year, I might have my numbers wrong, but I think you defeated 21 of 22 legislative initiatives that were anti-LGBTQ. And this year you defeated every anti-LGBTQ bill that was proposed. That's amazing.
Yeah, it has been a very interesting time to be alive, to live in the center of the, right wing machine, home of, effectively the home of Trump, and then mini me Trump, DeSantis, and an entire cadre of these billionaires that have propped Trump up in so many ways. Are also, right here. And so we've been the test kitchen for the worst kind of hateful recipes. But I think the most important message, that if somebody were to turn this off right now, I want everyone to know that we can fight back, even against incredible odds. Here in Florida, the Republicans have a supermajority so large that every Democrat could stay home and they'd still have quorum. And even in a place where DeSantis has been auditioning to replace Trump, to be the mini Trump, to be the heir to Trump, and has been pulling from the same, authoritarian playbook, we have still been able to throw sand in the gears. And I think one of the best things that we've done, or one of the most important things that we've done, and we didn't know it was going to be this important, was we launched this program called Coast to Coast for Equality, where we went across the country talking to leaders, raising money for the front line at a time when people were sort of abandoning the front line. And we were saying, you have to understand that everyone's a Floridian right now. This is your fight because it's coming to your doorstep. And right now, with the reelection of Trump, it's coming to everybody's doorstep.
So how did you do this? I mean, what does resistance look like to you?
Well, one of the things, let me say quickly, because I know that when you say you and you say Nadine, you are actually talking about the incredible team that is Equality Florida, the volunteers, and then beyond that, the amazing coalition of local groups and state partners that we've built together to fight back.
That's exactly what I meant.
Absolutely. And so one of our primary messages has been concede nothing. Fight them for every inch of ground. If they're going to school board meetings, do not miss a school board meeting. If they're going to city council, county commission, cede nothing, capitulate in no way, obey in advance in no way, and challenge them, because a couple of things are going to happen. One, it's the squeeze won't be worth the juice, right? That we will gum up the works in a way that they have to make hard choices between which thing they want to accomplish. The other is there are people who are really conflicted about what is being asked of them. And when you make them confront the morality or immorality of what they're doing, it can be enough to nudge somebody who is just in the right place to say, I didn't like this to begin with. I'm going along with it because my party is, it was easier. It was the path of least resistance to capitulate, but I got to go home and face my kids. I got to go home and face my community, my, lesbian aunt, or whatever it is in their own world. We have to make them hear the argument. And it doesn't mean that they immediately reverse course and do the right thing, but politics is a game of moments. And in that moment, someone deciding not to extend the clock or to TP a bill and not bring it back up, or just not to take up a bill that now has become too toxic. You have to deploy, you don't know what the grain of sand, we call it throwing sand in the gears of everything. You don't know which grain of sand it's going to be. It might be that Republican dad who came to the school board meeting, who never thought he'd have to go to a school board meeting to defend his kid at a time when the schools are under attack, and Moms for Liberty, this right-wing cosplaying parents group, which is really a group of political operatives funded by right-wing think tanks, are going into the schools and making schools more hostile. And that dad who said, yeah, I'm just going to go and listen, is suddenly at the podium and speaking not from pre-digested talking points, but just speaking as a father, pushing back against people who are saying hateful things about his kid. And you can feel the energy in the room shift. So for us, it's like, you can't plan that. You don't know that's going to be the moment where somebody says, you know what, we've gone too far. This is too much. Or I'm not willing to carry this ball any further than this moment. You can't script those. And what you have to do is create the circumstances that are ripe for those moments where you just sort of catch lightning in a bottle. And so it has been this remarkable coalition where we have said we will challenge them at every turn. We will kill every bill we can kill. We'll mitigate the harm of the bills we can't. And we will prepare to meet them in court. And that's what we did with the Don't Say Gay, Don't Say Trans bill, and ended up with a settlement that not only knocked down the biggest parts of that bill, but also secured things that we hadn't asked for. But they try to play this cute little game where they don't say exactly what they mean. They leave it vague enough, but then they let their rhetoric be the thing that intimidates school districts or whoever they're targeting, businesses that host drag shows, and then when you challenge them, they go, we never said that. That's not the language in the bill. Well, this flipped that on its head, because all of their denials that this was an attack on the LGBTQ community meant the settlement required them to affirm that these weren't intended to do that, and that they couldn't. In fact, there's language in there that says you cannot teach that heterosexuality is superior to homosexuality or bisexuality. Not a thing that we had gone to court for, but that is something under Governor DeSantis' signature that had to be delivered to every school district. So you give no ground, and you leave the opportunity that just the sheer number of us present will grind the gears to a halt, or there will be a moment of such crystallized embodiment of why this is so wrong that it can prick the conscience of even people who seem to have lost their way completely in service to their MAGA overlords.
I love that you say don't give any ground, which makes everything important, which of course is also overwhelming because everything is so much. But you taught me something years ago, and I've tried to use it, and I'd love you to just tell me again so I can take it into today and tomorrow. You
Okay,
said,
I'm braced now to see if I remember what I said.
oh, if you don't, I'll remind you. You said we have to redefine success.
Mm.
And you told me a story about there was a local group where nobody was organized, and some of the people from Equality Florida went to try to do a town hall meeting, and just a few people showed up, and they felt like that had been a failure. Are you remembering what you said to me?
I am. I won't say the city, but I mean, I think the premise here is it's just like when we go to Tallahassee. We tell people your presence here, it doesn't mean that after you're done speaking, you might stand there and watch them vote completely along party lines to pass the very same bill.
Yep.
And you can decide in that moment, well, what did it matter? Why me being here made no difference whatsoever. But your presence may mean that it passed that committee but won't get scheduled for the next. Your presence may mean that one of those people who votes the wrong way because they think it's the path of least resistance is now sitting with those words, is haunted by the fact that you stood there as a parent, as a student, as somebody harmed directly by what they are doing, and they can't shake it. And they're sitting in church or they're sitting in their drive home, and you don't know how these things work on people. The number of times that we have failed to pass a human rights ordinance at the local level, and then the next year, the person who cast the vote to kill the bill ends up being the sponsor of it. Because people have to process what they did in the real world. And it's an interesting phenomenon because sometimes when we go after things, there's a bunch of people that fit into two categories who don't show up. They're the ones who think, oh, that's obvious. That'll get done. They don't need me. And the people are like, that'll never happen. That's pointless. And so when we lose by a narrow margin, the ones who thought slam dunk, no need to show up, are furious that it failed. And the ones who thought there was no chance at all are invigorated at how close we came. And now the next time, they all fully show up. So showing up in organizing, being present is such a powerful thing. And you have to let go of the idea that victory is simply a good vote or a bad vote. It's about impacting the context. It means that, I can't tell you the number of times that I run into somebody who was in high school when we were pushing for a anti-bullying bill, a statewide anti-bullying bill. And your brother was very helpful to us in that fight. And now they're in their 20s, they're in their 30s, and they're still organizing. They're still doing the work. They didn't get to see it pass while they were in high school, but they got to see it pass when they were in college. They've gotten to see a world that they tried to create get better for students. Even right now, as bad as things are, and they're terrible, they are much better than they were when Equality Florida was founded.
Oh, yeah.
We're working to claw back things that were unimaginable to so many people when we first began this work. So, yes, when I say redefine victory, understand that the seeds are being planted at all times. And that doesn't mean that they bloom immediately, but we have grown so much bigger in these last 3 years from people who have gotten off the sidelines, from parents who again, once Moms for Liberty was out there talking as though they were actual parents of kids in public schools. Turns out they weren't. For the most part, they were political operatives, or they had their kids in these right-wing schools, but they were over here dictating to parents who have their kids in public schools. what they can read, what they can think, what their teachers can say, how their teachers are permitted to address them, all of these things. And when the real parents show up, it's what's that car? People say a Chrysler 300 looks like a Phantom until it pulls up alongside a Phantom. Well, these fake Moms for Liberty political operatives standing next to actual parents whose kids are in that school, people can see the difference immediately. And over time, parents of kids in that school system began to outnumber, in some cases, 10-1, the Moms for Liberty folks. It also helped that Moms for Liberty was just mired in scandal after scandal.
Right.
That were off. I'll just say they were not on brand for how they spoke, and they seem to have a loose grasp of what consent is. But that being said, it became in Florida, to be a candidate endorsed by Moms for Liberty became a liability. You actually had candidates asking Moms for Liberty not to endorse them, trying to distance themselves. I think it was 72% of Moms for Liberty candidates lost in this last election. Even on the night that Trump won, Moms for Liberty candidates lost. So we have to continue to expose that they have no concern whatsoever for kids. What they have concern for is indoctrination, surveillance, censorship, pushing an ideology, pushing their idea of who everyone should be, how everyone should think, how everyone should worship. And what they've run into here in Florida is a wall of resistance. This past year, we had more than 5,000 parents attend more than 500 school board meetings, standing up for their kids. And when they come to Equality Florida and say, this is happening in my school, we don't care what your political affiliation is, we don't care who you voted for.
Right.
All we care about is your kid is in trouble. We have the resources to help. And once people begin to advocate in their school on behalf of their kid, it's natural for them to think, well, where did this idea come from?
Right.
Yeah, I'll go to the school board meeting. And then eventually, hey, you know what? They're passing these laws in Tallahassee. I'll go to Tallahassee.
So Nadine, we know that one of Trump's favorite tactics for rallying his base is just to spread lies and repeat falsehoods. It's one of the reasons we were inspired to create Fact Check by Woodhull. What do you think the role of truth is in the face of authoritarianism? Blah, blah.
The word is so repulsive to you that
It is.
It doesn't even fit in your mouth properly.
My mouth refused to wrap itself around it.
Yes. Here's the thing I think is really important for people to understand, that there is an authoritarian playbook. It is, this isn't new.
Right.
We invoke Germany, but we could be talking about Putin in Russia. We could be talking about Hungary. We could talk about the United States in a lot of different spaces. That among the things that you do to create an authoritarian base is you exaggerate anybody's grievance. You play on anxiety and turn it into fear, and then you direct that fear at a scapegoat. And there have been different scapegoats at different times. In the U.S., here in Florida, we know Anita Bryant was one of the catalysts for this authoritarian movement. She used all of these same tactics: save our children, calling us, implying, not just implying, stating that we were inherently a danger to children. She was bankrolled by the moral majority. And the moral majority at that point didn't care about abortion. In fact, was supportive of abortion. They hadn't figured out how to use that as their next base building tool. Their big issue was that the courts were desegregating schools, and they saw attacks on the LGBTQ community as a way to turn people against schools. They did McCarthy-esque, the Johns Committee in Florida was the McCarthy version in Florida, and they did purges in the public education system, not just K through 12, but in universities, where they went after professors, students, staff who were LGBT. They had an entire investigative unit that would go into universities a friend of mine described coming from a wealthy family in Connecticut, falling in love for the first time and feeling, despite knowing that these investigations were happening, if anyone can remember how invincible you felt the first time you fell in love, and they got snagged by this investigation. Her girlfriend told the truth and was expelled. And she said, I lied. She said, I walked into a room where they put the newspaper from my hometown in front of me and told me that if I did not give up names and admit that I was in a homosexual relationship, the headline in that newspaper would be, local pervert, expelled from University of Miami.
Mm.
And she said, I lied and I lied and I lied. And finally they said, okay, but you have to go on dates with men. You have to keep a diary that you have to surrender to our agents at any moment. Now, that was in the 50s. Anita Bryant comes along later. I remember being a kid and wondering why this woman who used to sell us orange juice was suddenly selling terrible, terrible things about gay people. It also was, in some strange way, and there may be people in my age group who can remember this, but suddenly, like the PTL Club and the 700 Club were all running clips of pride events in San Francisco, New York. And I remember seeing Dykes on Bikes in the background.
I remember that.
Right. And, it would be whatever the big haired pastor and speaking, and they'd be running it in the background. And I would be thinking, I didn't have a vocabulary for this, but I want to go where those women on motorcycles are.
Yes.
Right. And so for a lot of us, it was right-wing media's obsession that was the most reliable place to see images of our community, especially if you lived in a small town like I did. So anyway, that's just what I guess the reason I'm saying that is, sometimes what they do to come after us ends up opening the door for our goal. And by that, I mean, in the fight for marriage equality, in some ways, it was them making marriage their wedge issue.
Right.
And provoking 38 fights across the country that took a lot of people who might not have made that their priority or might not have believed that it was possible off the couch and into the fight. And the backlash
Right,
to their
that wasn't on our agendas, marriage equality. That was a bridge somewhere in the future.
Yeah, there were a lot of people, not unreasonably, saying, hey, if we go for marriage, we're going to close the door on employment. We're going to close the door on a bunch of things that are more urgent, affect more people, et cetera. And there was an argument that, equally valid, that said, these are the things that put us into the realm of talking in ways that are the people that we know understand. Like, I can't explain how different it is. It's almost like my family did not have the right guidepost to understand what a relationship was that I was in until marriage. Now it's like, okay, got it. Right. This is who this person is. They're family now. We're good. And so, there's an argument that it actually lifted all boats by creating an environment to have a conversation about who we were, that our family members could relate to, that it focused the sameness of us rather than the things that are different. And there are things that are different, and hallelujah that there are. But all of that is by way of saying that I think it is important for us to realize that sometimes it is the backlash, that in that backlash, it's sort of a recognition. There's an author named Stephen Prothero that says backlash is a lagging indicator of cultural change, that by the time they mount up to try to push you backwards, it is actually them admitting that the culture has already passed them by, and that it has what I would call a slingshot effect. They think they are pushing us backwards, but they're actually creating the dynamic tension necessary in that slingshot, that when we break free, we don't just go back to where we were when they attacked. We propel forward, and suddenly things that did not seem possible or within reach are within reach. And that's not just on LGBTQ issues. In some ways, it was the oligarchs of the previous golden age and their absolute grip on government, their absolute neglect and disregard for, the humanity of workers. They're sending in the Pinkerton men to massacre union organizers. All of those things created the backlash in which the New Deal became possible. And
Right.
so we always have to keep in mind that we are fighting back. But when, politicians say things like, we can't just be against things, we have to be for things. I agree. But I also recognize that our opposition to what is happening right now is about paving the way for that future. And we've got to talk about that future that is so irresistible that some of the people drawn in by the play to fear and the sense of belonging to something special. And I think this is really important. Sometimes the folks on the left don't get this, but people who are drawn to Trump right now are not uniformly drawn to his racism. All of the things that we hate the most are indifferent around the LGBTQ community. What they saw was somebody who was saying, "This whole thing is rigged. How do I know it's rigged? Because I've been taking advantage of it. And you know what? So is my opponent." Right? And they've positioned themselves as disruptors, and they have created a narrative in which we are the ones who are policing and censoring and telling people what they can think and what they can say, and we're the scolds while they're offering, "Hey, you know what? You don't have to live under this political correctness," right? And it is why there is so much regret building among people who said, "Look, I just wanted somebody to shake up a system that seems pretty broken to me."
Right.
A friend of mine who was a big Trump supporter and now runs an organization called Leaving MAGA. We met at Howard University. We ended up talking, I think, for 45 minutes in a stairwell, and he talked about the process of going into MAGA, abandoning all of his Democratic friends, being pulled into this really cult-like experience, and the process of extracting himself. And it was so helpful to me in understanding, because I said, "How did you go from being a Nader Obama voter to a Trump voter?" And he said, "I was looking at a ballot that had another Clinton and another Bush, and it seemed to me that our system was so broken that,
Huh.
how is it that two families are producing yet another wave of who's gonna be the next president?" He said, "I never bought into a lot of this stuff, but I did begin to buy into the idea that we were the last hope of reclaiming a democracy and breaking it away from these elites." Now, it is, and one of the things he says that I really respect is he said, I don't say I got seduced or drawn in." He said, "I walked into it." And he said, "And the reason I have to do that is I have to take accountability for my decision to step by step enter that world, because then I can take credit for step by step exiting that world."
Did
And
he
he
share with
creates,
you what the turning point was for him?
it's interesting that you say that, because I think that there's because of course, it was one of the first things I asked, and
Of
he
course.
talked about, multiple places of demarcation. And I do encourage folks to check out leavingmaga.org, because he puts up stories from people who have taken a similar journey. And I don't know anybody that I've spoken to who has not felt the sense of loss of a family member or a friend or an old high school buddy or military, buddy, to that world. And I am increasingly convinced that there's a certain segment of the community of the world that is just racist, just bigoted, revels in that identity and is unreachable. But there's a whole lot of people who were just fumbling their way through and are algorithmically kettled into a worldview, because we're all not watching the same television. We're all not news. We, I created a phony online identity and called him Alan. And Alan was a 75-year-old grandfather of 3 girls, ex-military, and all I did was post um, sports clips. The speed with which I was surrounded by the MAGAverse, you
Huh.
know, I've never been called brother so many times,
Yeah.
"Hey brother, you gotta, find out about this. Hey, check this out." And just like but one of the things that Rich from leavingmaga.org said was, it's community. Like, you have this really strong sense of belonging. It's not just angry, divorced dads sitting around complaining. It's a sense of community that is brought up around this idea that you are the last people standing between the complete disintegration of the country to these elites, and a real disruption that can actually create some economic possibilities that don't exist right now. So I know sometimes it's hard for people to hear that, because we watch the horrors being inflicted on the transgender community. We watch the horrors being inflicted on immigrants. All of these things, it's just infuriating. And yet, I think that if we are talking about a way forward, we have to figure out, not bang our heads against the wall of people who are unreachable, but how do we continue to leave the light on for people who are struggling and are trapped in a world where they're not getting a lot of information. So when you ask me what's the role of truth, the role of truth comes right after the role of empathy and opening the door for real conversation. Because people who are wrapped up in this cult-like experience, they can't hear the truth if they don't think you can. If there's no generosity of spirit in hearing where they are situated, what their fears are. Like, I'm living in a world where I don't know that there's going to be a job for me once AI automates all of these things, and I don't know that I'm ever going to have the things my parents had. If you can just sort of be with that for a minute, all of the stories of people leaving MAGA that I've seen and Rich has shared with me, it's not a single moment, it's a cumulative series of things. That line gets crossed and you rationalize it. Now that line gets crossed. You don't rationalize it, but you contrast it with this bigger mission that you're on. And then finally it comes to a place where you go, if I don't leave now, I never will. And I will have lost some part of myself that I will regret. And so it's not like a bolt of lightning. It's more like an erosion. And in that moment, has anybody left the light on? Has anybody said, hey, look, there's a different way to see this world? And then that's where I think empathy and truth can cause that person to go, I did bad things for reasons that may not have been bad in and of themselves, but I can make amends for it. There's a way back.
So I've been watching, actually it's not a series, it was a movie about the making of Fiddler on the Roof. And it's in the context of society, going all the way back to when the original stories were written by Shalom Aleichem, and they were read in Hebrew. La 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 la. It's a wonderful thing if you have time to watch it, if you happen to love Fiddler on the Roof, which I did. But there were several things in this picture that struck me.
Okay.
So, for example, they took Fiddler on the Roof to Japan. And at the intermission, their host came up to the director and said, so people in America see this play? And he said, well, yes, of course. And he said, how do they relate to it? It's so Japanese.
Oh, wow.
Because of the universality of what's happening. And of course, what's happening is, in some ways, what we're seeing today, where you can all live together until somebody decides you can't live together. And some people have all the rights and power, and other people live at their pleasure. And there are marriages that take place. One daughter leaves her religion to marry someone, and that's catastrophic. And I found so many similarities. But in this movie, Fran Lebowitz comes on and she talks about why the Jews came to America. And she says, in Ireland, the Irish immigrants didn't come here because they thought America was so great. They came here because they were starving. And she gives another example. I forget which country it was. They came because there were no jobs. There was no way to make a living.
Mm-hmm.
And they thought life would be better in America. She said none of that was true for the Jews. The Jews came because to stay, they would have been killed. And I started thinking in terms of the trans community and what we're seeing, not subtly at all in this country, as this authoritarian, see, I got it out that time, playbook is being followed almost as if they're checking off boxes.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think there's a few books that I would recommend on tyranny by oh gosh, Tim. I'll come back to that. But on tyranny, it's on the bestseller list again because people are waking up. But it really is the blueprint. There's also the Sum of Us by Heather McGhee, who talks about Jim Crow South, but also in a way that it's not just about the misery of it. It's about the lessons learned and how they were used to propel us forward. And all of these lessons are ones that we need right now. We really have to lean into that history, realize that so much of what we are experiencing right now, we have experienced as a nation before, as people before. And there is wisdom in that history. And I think it will stop us from despairing if we can remember that people fought back with fewer resources than we have right now. And then the other piece of it that I think has been really effective in organizing is that we have built more of a community-based organizing model. I think a lot of people are used to sort of electoral politics where suddenly in a certain window of time, you are deluged with text messages and mailers and phone calls and it's all too much and you can't turn on the television without seeing commercials. But it all feels very transactional. You don't feel like you're part of a community. And I think one of the strengths of Equality Florida is ongoing engagement with people. We're not just around when legislative session is around. We're not just part of your world when it's time for people to go vote. We're in community and in context with folks in an ongoing way so that when we say, hey, this is really important, I'll give you an example. There's a pastor, Andy Oliver, and I was asking him about faith organizing because I've seen a lot of different attempts at faith organizing and they tend to fizzle out. And he approached me about Pride. He said, I want to go reach out to, and he's a Methodist pastor, a straight ally. And he said, I want to reach out to some mainline churches and see, not the usual suspects, but folks who maybe have never been asked to see if they will march at Pride in St. Pete. And he said, so I'm just wondering if you all will, if I get them, if you'll help cover the cost of the signage and different things. Absolutely. We thought, $2,000 maybe, right? So he came back, he said, I got good news and I got bad news. The bad news is we're going to need more money because the good news is so many more churches have said yes than I would have imagined. And by the time Pride rolled around, I believe there were somewhere between 30 and 40 mainline churches that marched. And the feedback he got, one church, I think he said that was sort of like one that he wasn't sure which way they would go. He wasn't sure. He thought we'd have maybe 7, 10, somewhere in there. So clearly there were many more than he had thought. But he said one of the pastors in their sort of debrief afterwards said, I've never felt closer to Jesus than I did in that march. I've never been to one before and I'll never miss another one. And I think that in these moments, instead of being in a fearful crouch, as hard as things are, and I do not mean to minimize the trauma that people are going through, people who in here in Florida have had to uproot their lives, close their businesses, sell their childhood homes, and move to another state or to another country where they could get health care for their kid or for themselves. It's been horrible. And yet what history tells me is we have to focus on the places, even in the midst of all of this, where we can create momentum. We can invite people into the work in a way that leaves them not feeling helpless and doom scrolling, but going, wow, me being there made a difference. Me showing up for that phone bank, me showing up for that school board meeting, the time I spent online doing rapid response tipped the outcome in this state agency meeting, or at the minimum, it made me feel better to do something rather than
Right.
bemoan where we are. And I think over the last, just through our online organizing, in addition to, every event we have is more people than ever before. This past legislative session, our Pride at the Capitol event, we're going to need a bigger boat. The theater that we hold trainings in is no longer adequate for the crowd that's showing up. We had to turn people away. But all of that is to say that is a good problem to have, and it speaks to the fact that people, as painful as these times are not running away from the fight. They're showing up, and I think it's because we can demonstrate the difference, the impact that people who might not have, people who weren't there year one are seeing the impact of the people who did show up that first time, and now they're like, I'm not going to miss it. When the story is written, I'm going to be able to say, I was there. I showed up. I stood toe to toe with the Proud Boys, with Moms for Liberty, with whatever they threw at us. And I think the other thing that really fires up our team, both staff and volunteers, is that everything we learn here, we have exported to every other state that's facing this.
Which is amazing.
Well, and they're going to make it their own recipe because they have different sets of circumstances. But, the strategy that says you confront them at every turn, you build unprecedented coalitions. There may be people that you've never laid eyes on before, you've never met with. Now's the time, because this is fundamentally an attack on democracy that is impacting more people than our community. And if you've never been in coalition with them, go knock on that door and say, hey, listen, we're facing the same enemy. And if we face them one at a time, they will mow us down. If we face them united, we can take them on. We can shake the room. And that's what's happening. So, our mantra has been, do not capitulate, fight them every step of the way, build an unprecedented coalition, and force them to say out loud the thing that they want to imply. And I call it the mouse in front of the flashlight.
Right.
Like, they want us to look at the shadow, not the mouse. They want us to see them as bigger than they actually are. And when we compel them they want to pass a law that is narrowly written to protect to keep it from violating constitutional rights, but they want to surround it by rhetoric that intimidates and causes people to go, I don't want the backlash from the governor. I don't want the jeopardy that they might put me in. But every time people go, okay, put that in writing, cite the law, tell me exactly under what authority you can demand that of me. What generally happens is that's the end of the conversation. So yeah, we've been able to share the strategies, even the language that we use in Florida, to say, don't let them define the conversation. Nobody remembers the name of the Don't Say Gay, Don't Say Trans bill that the Republicans gave it. They remember the name we gave it, because the names the Republican gave it, bill names are propaganda.
Right.
What we did was give it a name that told people what it does. And that's the name that people remember. And it infuriates them because no one remembers the propaganda name that they used to try to deflect criticism of it. But, I think we've learned some really important things about engaging a community and calling on people to be brave and not think that we're the nannies that have to keep them from the fight. Like, we really had some soul searching to do when Moms for Liberty would be at school board meetings with Proud Boys, armed, masked up with T-shirts that said things like, have you shot your neighborhood groomer?
Oh my God.
And what is our moral obligation when a parent who, again, never in their lifetime thought they would need to reach out to us, never thought that they'd need to go to a school board meeting to make sure their kid was treated with the minimum level of decency, what is our obligation to encourage them to go, to discourage them from going? And our realization was that's not our decision to make. Our obligation is to let them know exactly what they may face based on what we know. But then people make decisions for themselves. And overwhelmingly, in places where we thought maybe parents would be afraid, if anything, it strengthened their resolve to go. And it has made all of the difference in the world to have real parents of kids in public schools show up at school board meetings and not let the cosplaying political operatives of Moms for Liberty get away with, the charade they're trying to pull.
Oh, that's phenomenal, Nadine. I as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking this model that you've created, this means that in every state, people can find their local organization and engage around LGBTQ rights. But I'm also thinking this model can be applied across all the issues, the identities, the communities that Woodhull is involved with. Reproductive justice, adult content creators, sex workers. I think this is a lot of it's going on, but the way you've organized this, I think is very, very exciting.
Yeah, I mean, people get to tell their own stories in their own ways.
Right.
And what we know is, the creators of Moms for Liberty, of course, are entangled in a sex scandal, investigated for, potential sexual assault. Those charges have since been dropped, but the information leaked about what was going on was not on brand for how Moms for Liberty presented themselves. What we know is that, like there's a new law that's being discussed about banning porn. Well,
Right.
if you want to see where the highest consumption of porn, just follow the Bible Belt, right? All of the places, every time people introduce legislation, it always feels like they're telling on themselves.
Yes.
Quite literally, years ago in Florida, there was a lawmaker who pushed a law that would make it a higher offense to solicit sex in state parks.
Yeah.
This is what he got arrested for.
Yeah. Or Larry Craig. Remember Larry Craig?
Oh, absolutely. But I think there was another Republican congressman who had sponsored a law enhancing the charges if you solicited someone online. And then, of course, what happened to him? He got arrested for soliciting online. Anyway, but it's almost like this is their tell. Every time they try to get on a high horse, they're just telling you what they're into. And again, if you want to, the fastest grow, somebody took on the job of listing every time somebody in DeSantis or Trump's inner circle was arrested for, sexual crimes against children. And they were just like, I can't keep up. I mean, there's not a week that goes by. And it is always the, head of this, this Christian private school, this, Trump insider, this DeSantis, major donor. And it's not coincidence.
No.
All of this, all of what they do is a tell. It's always projection. It's always a way of deflecting. You pretty much, if you see a Florida politician, this is probably true elsewhere, suddenly start ranting again about the trans community, they might as well just raise their hand and say, I'm trying to hide a scandal. I'm trying to hide some corruption. I'm trying to hide some criminal activity that I'm involved in. And this is my go-to.
The magician. Look over there. Don't look over here.
Yeah.
Right. Right. I don't want to take any more of your time. I do. I want to take hours and hours of your time.
I forgot that anyone's watching. I just thought it was you and me just doing what we do sometimes.
Yeah. But I want to give the people who are chatting in the chat an opportunity to engage with you and ask questions. And and get to do what I love to do, which is talk to Nadine. So I'm going to end this portion and open it up to our attendees.
All right. Sounds good.
I'm afraid our time for today is up. Nadine, I want to thank you so much for making yourself available today to chat with us, to give us hope. I'm going to leave our time together with that vision of the slingshot propelling us beyond where we were to an even brighter future. I want to thank everyone for joining us today for this Freedom Forum program. If you like this program and you want to see more of them, please consider donating to support Woodhull and the work that we do, including this Freedom Forum. Thanks, everybody, and have a great day.